The Happy Warrior Podcast, conservative commentary on the news of the day from a more positive perspective.
Hello everyone, welcome again. This is the Happy Warrior Podcast, here with your host, Happy Warrior Pete. It's good to be here with you in this December. We got, 20 days to Christmas. I'm very excited to be here with you. Thank you so much for your support with the podcast, with the sharing, the commenting, with listening, with the reviews. Thank you for all that. If you like what you hear, maybe even if you don't, please leave us a positive review on iTunes. It makes a big difference. The more reviews, the more positive they are, the more likely people will see this podcast when they search for it or when they look at political podcasts. Also, you are free to ask questions or leave ideas or anything at all, really, with us at our Twitter, our Facebook, or email. Just going to go through those. Twitter is Happy Warrior P. Facebook is Happy Warrior Pete. And the last email is pete@happy-warrior.net, pete@happy-warrior.net. Feel free to contact with ideas, comments, questions, concerns, anything at all. You're more than welcome to contact us. So what are we going to talk about first? I first want to talk about, we focus so much of the time on politics and talk about ideology, and we talk about policy and what that difference it makes, doing something or not doing something, or culture. I want to focus, though, more on that last bit, on the culture part. I want to focus on a man that, that did try to set an example for the nation. I think right now in this age of hyper-tribalism and hyper-partisan politics, and where we're losing meaning in our normal lives, and we're putting it in places that doesn't hold water, such as entertainment and politics. I think, it feels like the country's coming apart. And, that secret sauce that makes America work, the thing that stitches us all together, our love of country, and our faith in that we try to hold true to those principles as endowed and written in our founding documents. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. George H.W. Bush was that happy warrior. He really did live that life, and he set an example. He wasn't a man that was about being boastful. He was in that mold that George Washington set, that, Calvin Coolidge set, that, Truman to some extent set, that even perhaps President Eisenhower, where they treated the presidency as a chance to set an example for the nation, that the example meant more than the rhetoric. That example, where they're not boastful, the example where we set we're there almost like a father figure for the nation. And, something we really miss. I like a lot about President Trump. I'm not as pushed off as some people that he engages so hard in the culture war. But, we have to admit that we need someone like George H.W. Bush in our lives. And frankly, the government we have right now is the government we deserve. These last two presidents we have that have proven so divisive is largely because as a people that we've fragmented and become so tribal. But back in the day, back in the 80s, at the end of the Cold War, we had President Ronald Reagan, and then we had George H.W. Bush, and both were great men, and great in different ways. Ronald Reagan was more of an orator. He was maybe a more loud, and he was a more transformational president, whereas in President George H.W. Bush, he got to clean up the end of the Cold War, and he was the steady hand in control of the country when the Soviet Union crumbled. And it was important that we had someone like him there. And even when the Berlin Wall fell and the media went after him, it was like, why don't you boast more? And why didn't you come out like Reagan did? And he didn't, because he knew that this was a time to not put salt into the wound. This was a time to try to let peace have a chance. An amazing man. He was a prolific letter writer. He was involved with charities. When he had one of his Secret Service, and he found out the Secret Service had a kid that had leukemia, President George H.W. Bush shaved his head in solidarity with that to raise money for that and support him. That last week that President Bush passed away, he had visits from people on both the left and the right. President Obama was a friend of his. George H.W. Bush, say what you want about his policies, But George H.W. Bush was an exemplary man and set an exemplary presidency. Was he perfect? No. I mean, who can be? Were mistakes made? Probably. But as a president, setting that example, leading the nation like the father of a nation should, bringing back up that's the example that Washington set all those years ago. That was George H.W. Bush. My family always called him Papa Bush. He was always, kind of the Republican Bush, but they also really appreciate his thing. My grandpa served during the Cold War as in the missile silos, Missile Minuteman, I think they're called. And he always appreciated greatly President Bush's calm demeanor and his support. And he's always had a good word to say about Papa Bush. I'm surprisingly teared up. Part of it is because this eulogy I'm about to play for you by President George W. Bush. George W. Bush, if you remember, was similar to this in a way, that he never used the presidency as a chance to attack his opponents, but that he tried to treat that office with great respect and treat it as a sacred office. And guess who he learned that from? His dad. As this fabric of America seems to be decaying, we need to look for more men like George H.W. Bush. I'm not talking about necessarily their policy or ideology, but I'm talking about the way they lived their lives as human beings and American citizens. And we need to search those people out, and those are the people we need to elect and vote for. The government we have is the government we deserve. We're not going to get a great government if we as a people don't try to be better. And when we select our leaders, and we need to put those men and women up that live their lives like this, that live their lives like the happy warrior. This isn't a diss against President Trump. Unlike the media, I'm not using President H.W. as a bludgeon to attack Trump with. And I'm not being hypocritical either. I honestly do have respect for this man. All right. Well, there were 4 eulogies today. This is one of the reasons why it took me so long to get this episode out, was I was waiting to hear the funeral. I wanted to hear the funeral, so I had a clip of audio that I could share with you and to illustrate my point about the role that President H.W. Bush was. And I think of the 4, the biographers was really good, Meacham, but I'm going to use President 43. I think he had the best eulogy. Because he probably saw the most sides of President Bush. And I'll read a few stories after that, and then we'll move on. But I hope reading this, listening to this, brings your heart and your mind back to those days. For those that can remember the late 80s and the 90s, and for any, all of us, that were too young to remember those years, to think back about what our nation could be. If we tried. The example of President George H.W. Bush says to me that in America, our greatest days are in front of us. The best is yet to come. That America can rise again and be that shining city on the hill. America can be the 1,000 points of light. That was a famous phrase from President H.W. Bush. That's what I take from this. As you're listening to this talk, I hope you could put aside any partisanship and just listen to this beautiful message. And I give a total amen. This is the best speech I think I've heard President George W. Bush give, and it's completely worth hearing. If you haven't listened to it yet, please stop, take time out of your day to listen to this. If you have, it's about 13 minutes and you can skip ahead, but I recommend listening to it again even. It's so heartening. It just enlivens my spirit, and it inspires me to be a better man and a better American. All right, here's President George W. Bush giving the best speech of his life.
I once heard it said of man that the idea is to die young as late as possible. At age 85, a favorite pastime of George H.W. Bush was firing up his boat, the Fidelity, and opening up the 300 horsepower engines to fly, joyfully fly, across the Atlantic with the Secret Service boats straining to keep up. At age 90, George H.W. Bush parachuted out of an aircraft and landed on the grounds of St. Anne's by the Sea in Kennebunkport, Maine, the church where his mom was married and where he worshiped often. Mother liked to say he chose the location just in case the chute didn't open. In his 90s, he took great delight when his closest pal, James A. Baker, smuggled a bottle of Grey Goose vodka into his hospital room. Apparently it paired well with the steak Baker had delivered from Morton's. To his very last days, Dad's life was instructive. As he aged, he taught us how to grow with dignity, humor, and kindness. And when the good Lord finally called, how to meet him with courage and with the joy of the promise of what lies ahead. One reason Dad knew how to die young is that he almost did it, twice. When he was a teenager, a staph infection nearly took his life. A few years later, he was alone in the Pacific on a life raft, praying that his rescuers would find him before the enemy did. God answered those prayers. It turned out he had other plans for George H.W. Bush. For Dad's part, I think those brushes with death made him cherish the gift of life, and he vowed to live every day to the fullest. Dad was always busy, a man in constant motion, but never too busy to share his love of life with those around him. He taught us to love the outdoors. He loved watching dogs flush a covey. He loved landing the elusive striper. And once confined to a wheelchair, he seemed happiest sitting in his favorite perch on the back porch at Walker's Point, contemplating the majesty of the Atlantic. The horizons he saw were bright and hopeful. He was a genuinely optimistic man, and that optimism guided his children and made each of us believe that anything was possible. He continually broadened his horizons with daring decisions. He was a patriot. After high school, he put college on hold and became a Navy fighter pilot as World War II broke out. Like many of his generation, he never talked about his service until his time as a public figure forced his hand. We learned of the attack on Chichijima, the mission completed, the shoot down. We learned of the death of his crewmates, whom he thought about throughout his entire life. And we learned of the rescue. And then another audacious decision. He moved his young family from the comforts of the East Coast to Odessa, Texas. He and Mom adjusted to their arid surroundings quickly. He was a tolerant man. After all, he was kind and neighborly to the women with whom he, Mom, and I shared a bathroom in our small duplex. Even after he learned their profession, ladies of the night. Dad could relate to people from all walks of life. He was an empathetic man. He valued character over pedigree, and he was no cynic. He looked for the good in each person, and he usually found it. Dad taught us that public service is noble and necessary, that one can serve with integrity and hold true to the important values like faith and family. He strongly believed that it was important to give back to the community and country in which one lived. He recognized that serving others enriched the giver's soul. To us, his was the brightest of 1,000 points of light. In victory, he shared credit. When he lost, he shouldered the blame. He accepted that failure is a part of living a full life, but taught us never to be defined by failure. He showed us how setbacks can strengthen. None of his disappointments could compare with one of life's greatest tragedies, the loss of a young child. Jeb and I were too young to remember the pain and agony he and Mom felt when our 3-year-old sister died. We only learned later that Dad, a man of quiet faith, prayed for her daily. He was sustained by the love of the Almighty and the real and enduring love of her mom. Dad always believed that one day he would hug his precious Robin again. He loved to laugh, especially at himself. He could tease and needle, but never out of malice. He placed great value on a good joke. That's why he chose Simpson to speak. On email, he had a circle of friends with whom he shared or received the latest jokes. His grading system for the quality of the joke was classic George Bush. The rare 7s and 8s were considered huge winners, most of them off color. George Bush knew how to be a true and loyal friend. He nurtured and honored his many friendships with a generous and giving soul. There exist thousands of handwritten notes encouraging or sympathizing or thanking his friends and acquaintances. He had an enormous capacity to give of himself. Many a person would tell you that Dad became a mentor and a father figure in their life. He listened and he consoled. He was their friend. I think of Don Rhodes, Taylor Blanton, Jim Nance, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and perhaps the unlikeliest of all, the man who defeated him, Bill Clinton. My siblings and I refer to the guys in this group as brothers from other mothers. He taught us that a day was not meant to be wasted. He played golf at a legendary pace. I always wondered why he insisted on speed golf. He was a good golfer. Well, here's my conclusion. He played fast so that he could move on to the next event, to enjoy the rest of the day, to expend his enormous energy, to live it all. He was born with just 2 settings, full throttle, then sleep. He taught us what it means to be a wonderful father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He was firm in his principles and supportive as we began to seek our own ways. He encouraged and comforted, but never steered. We tested his patience. I know I did. But he always responded with the great gift of unconditional love. Last Friday, when I was told he had minutes to live, I called him. The guy answered the phone, said I think he can hear you, but he hadn't said anything for most of the day. I said, Dad, I love you and you've been a wonderful father. And the last words he would ever say on earth were, I love you too. To us, he was close to perfect, but not totally perfect. His short game was lousy. He wasn't exactly Fred Astaire on the dance floor. The man couldn't stomach vegetables, especially broccoli. And by the way, he passed these genetic defects along to us. Finally, every day of his 73 years of marriage, Dad taught us all what it means to be a great husband. He married his sweetheart. He adored her. He laughed and cried with her. He was dedicated to her totally. In his old age, Dad enjoyed watching police show reruns, the volume on high, all the while holding Mom's hand. After Mom died, Dad was strong, but all he really wanted to do was hold Mom's hand again. Of course, Dad taught me another special lesson. He showed me what it means to be a president who serves with integrity, leads with courage, and acts with love in his heart for the citizens of our country. When the history books are written, they will say that George H.W. Bush was a great president of the United States, a diplomat of unmatched skill, a commander-in-chief of formidable accomplishment, and a gentleman who executed the duties of his office with dignity and honor. In his inaugural address, the 41st President of the United States said this: "We cannot hope only to leave our children a bigger car, a bigger bank account. We must hope to give them a sense of what it means to be a loyal friend, a loving parent, a citizen who leaves his home, his neighborhood, and town better than he found it. What do we want the men and women who work with us to say when we are no longer there? That we were more driven to succeed than anyone around us, or that we stopped to ask if a sick child had gotten better and stayed a moment there to trade a word of friendship? Well, Dad, we're going to remember you for exactly that and much more. And we're going to miss you. Your decency, sincerity, and kind soul will stay with us forever. So through our tears, let us know the blessings of knowing and loving you, a great and noble man, the best father a son or daughter could have. And in our grief, let us smile knowing that Dad is hugging Robin and holding Mom's hand again."
And there you have it, my new favorite George W. Bush speech. Wow, that was excellent. That was really good. I hope you got emotionally, spiritually out of that like I did. That was excellent, excellent speech. I really don't have a lot more to say that wasn't said there. Just an incredible man. I know people have issue with the Bushes and my ideology. I know I disagree with the Bushes on a lot of things. They're a bit more big government Republicans than I would like. But as human beings, George H.W. lived the best you can with everything that he had and he faced and considered. Now, and I hope that we can see past our partisanship and recognize good Americans and recognize the good in each other and try to look for the best examples instead of the worst. For the most part, the coverage of George H.W. Bush by the media has been pretty good. The AP and the New York Times, not so much. The New York Times, to this day, is still pushing the fake, provably, demonstrably fake story about George H.W. Bush being excited by a scanner. That was a complete made-up story. The New York Times didn't even have a reporter there, but they still wrote it up anyways, as if they were. Everyone pointed out, look, he wasn't excited about the scanner. He was trying to be nice about a new scanner that could take a tag that was, broken up into 5 pieces, and the computer in it would figure out, what the full scanner tag was. And it was ridiculous. Anyhow, they pushed that, and then I think the AP bio said that he was this, wealthy patrician and had some other digs at him. Failed to mention his career as a war hero. It was not very good. That was not good. I mean, here and there's been things sort of like that. Someone wanted to comment about the Willie Horton stuff, which, one, it wasn't him that brought it up. That was a fold over from the Democrat primary campaign that Al Gore was in, and it was Al Gore at the time that brought up the Willie Horton stuff. And then it got brought up by a PAC that wasn't controlled by the Bush campaign. But again, that one was mostly factual anyways. I know it left a bad taste in a lot of black Americans' mouths, and I can understand why. But was it George H.W. Bush's it was there? No. And it wasn't even something that he campaigned on or referenced his speeches. What else would I like to say about the coverage? People are looking back. I think we need to learn from him. I hope that both sides can. I know the media is using this as a chance to hit Trump. But I hope that while they're doing that, that normal everyday Americans see this and it inspires them, and it makes them turn, especially ones that were, have memories of the 80s and the early 90s, and remember about what a leader could be and what we can be and what we should strive to be. Americans should go for our better natures. We should try not to, be such a tribal, cankerous, barbarian that we seem to be becoming more and more every day. And that's what I hope we take from all of this. My favorite, and I want to say it was the Washington Post that put this in, but it's this amazing cartoon, and it has a World War II fighter plane in these clouds, and next to it is President Bush, Barbara Bush, and a daughter that's supposed to be Robin, and they have their hand out and it says, "We were waiting for you." Sorry. Oh, see, and there's one more thing I do have in common with one thing I have in common with President Bush, HW, was so that people said that often he didn't like to talk about his war record because he could hardly talk about it without tearing up, and that he was often referred to as a crier, or was made fun of as a crier. But a remarkable man, remarkable. A good man. I don't think we necessarily deserve a person like that, but I think we could if we tried harder. If someone brings up Bush, just try to use this as a teaching moment. If it's someone on the opposite side of your political perspective, try to use this as a teaching moment to help us to be better people and to try to see the human in each other first before we see the partisan politics. That there can be love there. That he was a friend with Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. Bob Dole, who he was a fierce campaigner when he was running for the primary. Bob Dole, came and showed respect. Bob Dole's in a wheelchair because he's like 95. He's like almost the same age as Bush, President George H.W. when he passed. But he got out of his wheelchair to honor President Bush. Even President Trump, I'm going to give him credit. He just said nice things about President George H.W. Bush. He came, he stayed quiet, he gave a salute next to the casket. There we go. And for him, that seems like that's pretty big. So I major credit for him and everyone. I'm really just impressed by the maturity. That it gives me hope. Gives me hope for the future. All right, well, because the George H.W. Bush stuff took so long, it was important to do. He says he hated broccoli, but this was kind of like the broccoli of politics. We need this healthy stuff in our diet. We can't have just the sugary, what did Trump do today, junk. It doesn't really matter much. But, okay, so I do have some other stuff we're going to talk about. I have a couple of fun stories. Then we're going to talk about France. And then I want to talk about a little bit what's going on college campuses and what's going on in the EU. These are some stories you need to hear.
Now to a cute story out of China, and 12 giant panda cubs born this year in a Chinese research base have met the public for the first time. The chubby balls of fur melted the hearts of visitors at their debut on Friday. The research base bred 13 cubs in total this year, with one bear currently in Japan. Their dedicated keepers have ensured all the cubs are in good health and are being taken care of.
Oh, look at that. They're so cute. Yeah, that's a story. I've had this one on the back burner for a while. It's from Australia. It's called Panda Love. It's the stuff of romance novels. It starts there. I love it. It's so cute. You need to look at the video on this outline. It is freaking adorable. This is why humans keep trying to save pandas, because their children are ridiculously cute. And yeah, if they did this study over 2 years, and here's the interesting thing they found when they studied pandas. Over the course of 2 years, they found that giant pandas have the best, and possibly only, sex of their lives when their partners sing them a love song beforehand. These love songs are even whispered into the panda's fluffy ears during intercourse, which is just extremely romantic, in my opinion. I'm reading the guy that wrote this. Ryan, I don't know if that's a girl or man. Ryan Rhian Dutram? Ryan Dutram? Yeah, could be. Anyhow, yeah. Pandas sing songs. Did you know that? I had no idea. Apparently, pandas sing songs, and this must be the problem. They said the recorded sounds are described as bleats, chirps, moans, barks, and roars. I could not find the audio. Sorry, guys. That's the first of all my great stupid news. I have some more. My next piece of excellent stupid news is from Deadspin, and you guys might have heard this one. Farting controversy clouds Grand Slam of Darts quarterfinal. And this is funny because this is the initial story, but this thing kept going on for like a week or two even afterwards. The guy that was there was like, oh, I lost it. Because the guy like next to him when they're throwing darts passes gas pretty loudly. And, quote, Anderson said, it left a fragrant smell behind and will take him, quote, 2 nights to lose the smell from my nose. Anyhow, you might have heard this be called Fartgate. Yes, that is what it is called. It's called Fartgate. Now, the guy has denied the accusations, the guy that won with this cheap trick. But he, you know, we have a little clip here on Twitter with this little, you know, they have like, each guy says a little thing and there's funny laughter in the back. You know, it's a montage. It's a little sports montage. And he actually says, you know, I've actually farted and pooped myself. He doesn't use the word pooped. Yeah, it's big thing. They're still holding on to it. And the guy that lost is PO'd even now. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so the guy who won is Garwin Price, and the one who lost that is mad about the farting is Scott Anderson. Oh man, what a poopy head. Okay, that was pretty bad. Pretty awful. I wanted to say that one for Robert, but you need to get. I mean, it came out on like November 17th. That's how many weeks? 2 weeks ago. Getting to 3. We gotta get it out of here. We gotta cover it finally. Gotta cover Fartgate. Nothing is more important than Fartgate. All right. So moving on to more stupid news. We've done Panda Love. We've done farting. Now I have this way. This is the best way to handle animal control ever in the history of animal control. This is from The Telegraph. It's a British newspaper. Plan to use snipers to control parakeet population draws anger in Spain. I had to read that headline a few times, so I'll read it again. Plan to use snipers to control parakeet population draws anger in Spain. Yes, you heard that right, friends. Spain is planning to use Spain is planning to use trained snipers to shoot their colonies of parakeets. And they say that they're an invasive species, these parakeets. There's too many of them. The way they're going to handle it is to use snipers. And I don't know if that's a mistranslation, because like sniper, instead of just shooting, like snipers like trained guys, you know, I think of them with the long rifle, and you know, they're waiting on the hill. Maybe they've been there for days, just waiting for the perfect opportunity to take their shot. Their prey is like a 1-inch bird. I have parakeets. I have 2 parakeets. Well, they're my brothers. I help take care of them. And yeah, those things are small. They'd be hard to hit. I mean, goodness gracious, the bullet's got to be size of a quarter to half the size of their body. I mean, that's true. You hit a parakeet with this. When you snipe a parakeet, it just turns into a puff of feathers. And, you know, it is dangerous because besides the environmental damage these things are doing, these parakeets, they carry an infectious disease. I'm a little scared now, the parakeets, because they can get something called parrot fever. Dun, dun, dun! Yes, parrot fever. Dangerous to get. I don't know if it's worse than cat scratch fever, but you gotta watch out for the parrot fever, which seems a little rude. The parakeets are the ones carrying the disease. Why does it have to be named after a different species? Yeah, anyhow, you can imagine how this run out on the internet. People freaking out. Ah! Save the parakeets! Save the parakeets! And they're like, the parakeets are invading our, habitats. They're killing off all the Spanish native wildlife. You know, we have all these great Spanish birds. The parakeets are out eating them and outbreeding them. People in there are like, what? I don't care. No, don't shoot them. I mean, it's like the wolf problem they've had in the past, or deer. Just ridiculous. I understand at least some of the... Okay, so here's the thing, the wolf problem. So I live here in South Dakota, so we're a little bit more aware of the issue, but in the Midwest and in the Rockies and in Yellowstone in particular, they've tried to introduce wolves back in. And at times they get overpopulated and they spread out. They don't stay in Wildstone. You can find these wolves that are introduced to Yellowstone and get all the way to Minnesota. They've tried putting wolves in Minnesota before. It's a hard thing to balance because these things do pretty well once they get their foot in. But you want them for natural population control. But then again, you don't want them attacking people or animals. And it's just a hard issue to tackle. And so sometimes in places like Alaska, they're allowed to shoot them, and everyone just freaks out. There was one, I think, that in Yellowstone that just got shot and was a internet celebrity, this wolf. Yeah, and she was shot, and it was huge controversy. How could you? How could you? I mean, what are you going to do, guys? What are you going to do? Like, at the detriment of what? Other people and other animals, other wildlife? Internet sometimes makes us believe that these things are all black and white, and it's just idiots that don't understand, or they're just evil, or they just don't understand. But no, if the people are actually on the ground, they have to deal with this, deal with the wolves, deal with the parakeets. These are complex issues, and they've probably considered other alternatives, and they're just trying to figure a way to solve the issue. I mean, what else you can do? My grandma has a great story about Guam. Some people will refer to it as Snake Island because the snakes came on ships. These are non-native snakes. And basically, it's like there's 1,000 snakes for every couple square feet or something insane. I have to look up the stats again for you sometime. But yeah, it's like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of snakes on this small island. And they are everywhere. And it's kind of funny because my grandma is deathly afraid of snakes. She's just got a real phobia about the snakes. It's like, how did you live there? I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know how I did it. I didn't think about it. Yeah. But, invasive species is a big problem. Here, let's do one more. I'm having fun with this. So we'll stick to the theme of animals. We'll do this. This is an unbelievable story. Next to sniping parakeets, next to fart darting. I guess that isn't really animals, but it was boorish behavior. Panda Love. This is the last one we'll do here for now. Dog accused of a hate crime after fouling outside a home in just one of 2,500 cases probed over 2 years. This is from the Daily Mail. They say that this is like hate crime, like looking for hate crimes gone like awry. This is crazy. They say they have 2,500 cases like this where they say that animals are are committing hate crimes. How does an animal commit a crime? I mean, they can, isn't usually someone responsible? It's a person that commits the crime, effectively. If your dog bites someone, you're the one that gets in trouble. The dog gets euthanized, but the dog doesn't, we don't take dogs to trial. We would like to bring our witness to the stand. Yes. And then what he did. This dog is out of order. No. Yeah, so this is crazy. They have 2,500 cases like this. And this particular case was the dog supposedly went bathroom on a person's place. They alleged that this was a hate crime. Okay, I'm rereading the article. Okay, a little caveat on this. Little caveat. They're not saying that it's just animals. There are some other things too a little weird that are part of this hate crime list. But look at how hard it would be to deal with this stuff, because what can be constituted hate crime could be really weak. And how do you know a hate crime different from just a normal angry crime? I just don't like you. It's not because you're certain skin color, ethnicity. I just don't like you. So they have things like an envelope that's been opened and resealed. Hate crime. An accident involving a car that bore remembrance poppy. Another hate crime. How is that a hate crime? Oh, whatever. A disputed line call in a tennis match. Hate crime. A dead rat found in a garden. Hate crime. We need like a little signal that goes, hate crime, or something. We need a little buzzer. We need to work on that. Robert, if you're listening, we need to figure out this. We need to put more sound to this podcast. I think we should make that as our New Year's Eve goal. Our New Year's resolution. Put more sound effects into the Happy Warrior podcast. A man telling library staff he was campaigning for Brexit. That's a hate crime? Really? Really? That is pretty loose. Wow. Oh. It's sad, but I imagine that a good chunk of our students at our college campuses and young Americans agree with these ideas. I mean, their mind, it's the black and white, right? We just want to be nice. We just want to be nice. And so, they're just like, whatever, hate crime. But here's the problem with hate crimes. They're almost impossible to enforce. They really are, because they're so subjective. They're, how do you, the person that parks in front of another guy's house, how do you know if he's doing that because of race, if he doesn't just like you, or maybe he just likes to park underneath the shade of a tree? You don't know. And they have just really dumb things in here. I wonder why that they don't clean it up more. This would be very interesting. I don't live in the UK, but this is a good example of why we shouldn't push for hate speech laws in the United States. Okay, because when you actually have to enforce these things, it is very difficult, and it really does infringe on the freedom of speech. I mean, you have a right to campaign for or against Brexit. At least for natural rights. You have a right to your opinion. You have a right to speak it, okay? You should be able to do it without worry about being accosted or the government stopping you. That's, a natural right. That's a God-given right. I feel sad for the British people. And I have more on this. But we are first, before we talk more about the UK and the EU and the curtailing of freedoms of speech, we are going to talk about a sister nation on the other side of the channel. France. Yes, France is in the news, or should be in the news, even if it isn't, this last week. What is going on is referred to as the Yellow Vest riots. Well, what are the Yellow Vest riots? Well, the Yellow Vest riots are riots being supported. First of all, it was being supported by commercial drivers, so truckers, taxi people, and then also consumers, because diesel is actually used more than even gasoline in France, and there's a huge tax on diesel and gasoline. Actually, most of Europe has high taxes on fuel, but France has a problem is that it's a regressive tax that's only going to become more regressive. It's only going to tax more as it goes on because it's tied to the efforts of France to stop global climate change, formerly known as global warming, in years back before that, global cooling, and before that, global warming again. And I'd like to point out, here's some stats I think you guys need to know. I got this from NPR, but you can find it loads of places. Just the sheer amount of protesters is incredible. They say over last weekend, over 136,000 protesters turned out across the country. And before that, 280,000 people in previous weeks. This data is from the French Interior Ministry. Yeah, in France, they're known as the Gilets jaunes, which is yellow vest, or vest yellow, I think. French is not, it's not a language I speak. This protest came out of there's this lady with YouTube videos, and now even the lady that started this disavowed it, but it was that these long distance drivers had to pay more and more in fuel, and it was a frustration, and so the left and the right kind of jumped on that. They think that over the last weekend alone, $3.4 million of damage have been done. There are videos of, police in riot gear, fending off some of these protesters. Initially they said they just wanted the tax to go away, but how these things get out of control. Some people are saying we want the minimum wage increased. Others saying Macron has to go. Maybe this is most extreme, that they want the National Assembly dissolved and new elections held. They wear the vest because in France you have to have a yellow vest in your motor vehicle. It's by law. The people there are not happy. I think also the problem in France is the same problem that we're seeing here in the rest of the Western world, is that people are losing faith and losing interest in their traditional institutions. and politics are becoming more partisan. And France, in particular, has a strong history of protests. In the last, they've only had the current constitution they have right now. They got in the 1960s. They haven't been under this constitution very long. The French love a good protest. I mean, look at the French Revolution. I mean, since back in the day, they've had 5 or 6 constitutions in the last 150 years. French students love a good protest. This isn't looked at as normal. Like there's a poll that asks the average citizen, like, what do you think of the yellow vest riots? And they are riots. These aren't peaceful protests. And they said, 7 out of 10 was fine with it, that they supported them. And you would not get, even in the strictest of the labor movement here in the U.S., you just wouldn't get that number. It's just a whole cultural difference. The French Enlightenment had different values than the Scottish Enlightenment. And that's why we got French Revolution and why we got the American Revolution over here. That was one of the major differences. The rising fuel costs are a big problem, but it's just also a very great frustration with French government and the elite, and just the similar things that pushed the election of Trump, the similar things that pushed for Brexit. It's the same problems that we're seeing in parts of the rest of Europe, where the radical right is coming up, and I mean European right, not American right. American right and European right are night and day. They are completely different. It's because the European politics is looked at as state solutions, where the U.S. it's state solutions versus a small government. The state stays out of things. That's so. It's in Europe. It's about what the state will do for you, and they look at different strategies for that. And the right in Europe, the far right particularly, has a history with anti-Semitism, has a history with racism, has a history with Nazis. Just bad stuff. And it's interesting in France, because in France we actually have the far left and the far right working together on this. Marine Le Pen is part of this thing. Remember, Marine Le Pen was the daughter of a Nazi supporter in France, and she almost became the president, and Macron became the president instead. But he never really made a very strong coalition, because he had to make a new party called La Marche, which is the march, or moving forward. And it was a makeshift of what was the traditional French party on the left and some others, but it never really was a strong standing. It was a coalition government made up of a compromise. And it just didn't work out, and these taxes come up. When we pushed against the Paris Accord, this is why. Now, the U.S., the Paris Accord would never have any control. In most countries, it didn't, unless they, were forced to by the EU or the UN, and then the EU does what the UN wants much of the time. But here, it would have no bite. So even if President Trump enacted it, it wouldn't do anything. Okay, it'd be largely a symbolic measure. But then what they've done in France is they've actually tried to push out traditional fuels that are cheap and the consumer can afford, and it's trying to force them to go to alternative energy sources. The problem with that is that the poor tend to not have a lot of buying options. There's a reason they stick with gasoline and diesel. It's because what they can afford that. They can't afford solar. They can't afford, wind. They can't afford those other things. They can only afford what they can afford. And you can try to incentivize them all you want with taxes, but all it's going to do is make their lives harder. And that's what this protest is about. I mean, it's that populism fervor. It's the anti-state fervor. Does it set to any policies? Maybe the taxes, but I'm going to tell you a secret. There's nothing Macron can do to make these people happy. It's this, this tribalism, this populism fever, this populist fever. It's not really tied to policy, because they could get loads of policies and it'd be very difficult to make them stop. Okay, might be looking at a new French Constitution and a French Revolution. Now, when I say French Revolution, I don't mean the French Revolution. I don't think it'll get that violent. It is pretty violent right now, but I don't think we're going to see beheadings in the streets. Okay, but it would not be surprised at the least if we go for Constitution number 7. it would not be surprised at all. Macron said that he would put a moratorium on these taxes, just a temporary delay. I think it was for 60 days. He says he's willing to make some other measures, but he, in no way actually has he made any, like, we really are going to give away the taxes. No, we're just pushing them to the side for a little bit, but they'll come back. He's just not handling this very well. I feel a little bad for him. Well, not really, but a little bad for him is that he just is the wrong guy for the wrong time. This is the wrong time for the Macrons of the world. And it's frustrating, I'm sure. President Trump took a dig at him, but Macron totally deserved it 100%. So that's the French, what's going on in France in a nutshell. So what should you take away from this when you're talking to people? Well, use as an example of what happens when the little guy gets pushed too much. But, also be honest, saying the French have a different culture than we do. And protests, even sometimes violent protests, is looked at with more kindness than we have in the United States. And I'm glad. That's a good thing, guys. That's a good thing. It's a good thing that we push for peaceful dissension first. That's why a couple of weeks ago I covered the mob mentality that's popping up in the United States so much, because it is a problem. We don't want to go that other direction. It's a bad thing. What else can you? Well, and point to that Europe is going through a lot of changes. A lot of changes right now. France is like the 5th most effective economy. It's up there. It's in the top 10 of most powerful economies on the planet. So this is a big story. This is worth taking time to learn about what's going on. And I encourage all of you to do so. All right, here for this next story, I'm going to just play a little bit of audio. This is crazy. This is like something from Doctor Who. I imagine that if a writer over at Big Finish sees this, it's going to inspire some pretty cool fiction. All right, here's the audio. It's about plants, and it's about electronics, and it's about cyborgs.
This is Ilovan, a robot-plant hybrid driven with the plant's natural signals. Plants are naturally occurring circuits in nature. The cells and tissues of plants become excited under the influence of environmental factors. This can be change of lights, change of gravity, soil conditions, and more. Much like individual capabilities we program for in our electrical circuits. Ilovan is a hybrid that merges these two worlds. We attach silver electrodes to a plant, read and amplify its natural signals, and route them to a robot under a plant. We put lamps on either direction of the robot to trigger its natural signals, thus driving the robot underneath automatically. The robot goes left and right by itself, and the agency of such movements rests with the plant.
Yeah, so I don't know if you could hear the audio. It works better with the video, but basically they created a plant cyborg. This is amazing. I don't know how it totally works, but basically plants have things they naturally do using their cells, and they connect this machinery that reads the responses and uses that to tell a mechanism what to do, a computer what to do. In this case, they connect they connect wheels and a computer to the plant, and so plants naturally turn towards sunlight. And so what they do is they connect it with the computer, and the computer then uses this to move the machine. So the plant is moving the machine. It's a cyborg. The plant is telling the machine what to do. So they said this could be used for like because you know how plants naturally move and bend towards the sun? They said they could use these things for like solar panels. You could connect the plant to the computer, and the computer is also connected to the panels, and so as the plant bends towards the light, so with the panels. That's just one example they have. Just some really, really cool stuff. I'm just amazed. That's such a neat story. Oh man, it's kind of funny. They said the work was not meant as a project to make plants happy by giving them more autonomy. Instead, it was geared toward harnessing the processing power of nature. I told you about the solar panels. One other idea was they could use this to control temperature and humidity levels, or optimized not just for the plant but for the workers. So so if this plant the plant does what the plant does to be comfortable, and the computer adjusts with that, so it can control the temperature in the room. You connect your plant to your thermostat. And that's just one example, another example they have. Isn't that amazing? That's a neat story. That's crazy. This is how the plants take control. You know, in Doctor Who, they have I think it's like the second episode of New Who, where they go in the future and we meet like evolved descendants of plants that are humanoid and sentient. And they're like, humans weren't the only sentient species to evolve from Earth. And I think Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor makes out with the tree. It's pretty great stuff. That's one of my favorites. One of my favorites. Yeah, look, that is a neat story. See, so we need to lead. You know, I like to have these stories that are a bit more fun, have a bit more poof to it, so we're not so in the mire. We're not all sad all the time. Because, you know, I have this next story. It's not as nice. This next story is not as nice. And it just goes back to Florida. And as I told you, Florida just keeps messing things up. I don't know what's in the water in Florida. They have all those sea cows. Maybe it's the sea cows. Because this is an absurd story you have to read. Grandma mistakenly booked into a Miami jail as a man. Court ruling details who was to blame. And this is the problem with bureaucracy and having people check mark to decide these things. Because often at a certain gate through the bureaucratic maze, and or the ladder, their decisions are very hard to undo, and the people that make them have very little consequence if they screw it up. They don't really get in trouble for messing things up, and this applies to everything in government. Keep this story in mind when you think people who decides who gets disability and who doesn't. Think in mind, if we have single-payer health care and this person's going to decide who gets health care or not. Because things like this will be made decision. Remember, the guy that makes this decision in the story is a doctor. So again, grandma mistakenly booked into a Miami jail as a man. Court ruling details who was to blame. This is from the Miami Herald. It talks about Fior Picardo de Velos. My brother, who is fluent in Spanish, is going to hate me for saying that. I really butchered that. Okay, so she was booked as a man. She spent nearly 10 hours in a holding cell. This is insane. So the jail officers take her. The jail officer and the nurse say, this is a woman. Okay. Someone mentions, they strip search. It's a woman. Okay. Everything's okay. Every reasonable person, until we get to the top medical personnel, knows that this is a woman. Until we get to the doctor. And the doctor, Rodriguez Garcia, says no. For whatever reason, Rodriguez, he doesn't even hardly look at her, says that this is a man. It is so bizarre. We're not quite sure why they think that. They think maybe because she said earlier, someone mentioned that she took hormones, because, she was dealing with, sorry, I'm a little tired right now on recording this. She's going through the hormones that older women often do, and so they get the treatment to help with that. But somehow they confuse this for being transgender. She's obviously a woman. She says she's a woman, and the guy basically says, has male privates, but is saying he's a woman. It's just ridiculous. And everyone, they even had a guy, so she went to the jail. The person that was there, the guard that was there, even told her, you're going to go out into the prison and you're not going to make it back alive. And that's crazy. That's crazy. The guards still tried to convince them. They had loads of people try to convince this doctor. No avail. When she got to the prison, she did not go to the bathroom. She stayed next to the guards in eye line as far as possible. There was even an elderly prisoner that says, she's not safe here. This is a woman. What is she doing here? She got, whistled at and terrible things at. And she said she even peed herself, because she would not go to the bathroom. She was not going to put herself in any way that she'd be in danger with the inmates. It's just nuts. It was nuts. It's hard to believe this is a real story. But it is. It really is. I mean, what the heck, Florida? Florida, what the heck? This doctor that did this, by the way, I hope this one stays with him. I don't know, that sounds a little harsh, but to make this decision on this woman so arbitrarily and having such a dangerous impact, and it's very frustrating, very frustrating. This is what you guys need to learn. the bureaucracy often has very little recourse when they screw it up, even if everyone knows better. Number two, doctors are just as human and just as ignorant and stupid as everyone else, and they just want to get through the day and get their jobs done. They get tired, they make mistakes just like everyone else. Keep this in mind then the next time you want a doctor to decide something, you know, for, like, I use the example for disability. You know, this is what happens. If you apply for disability, your doctor you may get lots of doctors, the support and experts. Theirs doesn't matter as much as the random doctor that the judge contacts to ask his opinion. A doctor that will never meet you, but will make this life-altering decision, deny or give you support. It's frustrating. It really is. As someone that's had personal experience with the system, I can tell you that the bureaucracy really is the worst, and it is a terrible way to handle these things. All right, that was a little bit ranting, but I had to get on my system. I feel so bad for this lady. Thankfully, she is able to move forward with her suit. Hopefully, she makes a couple million. I mean, the lawyer will get most of that, but, you know, if she could come away with a couple $100,000, that'd be pretty nice, right? A little justice. All right, so this next one, okay, so usually I like more fun, stupid stories between my hard segments, but I'm going to slip this one in. I saw this last night. It broke my heart. It makes me sad. You know, the degradation of the family has such a huge impact on everything in our society, because families really are the tiny governments that people are turned from barbarians into citizens. And when the family breaks down, it hurts everyone. It hurts all our institutions, all of our society. It makes us all the worse for it. Family degradation has huge consequences. And the children are the ones that have to pay the price. Part of that degradation is also the rise of the internet. The side effect that humans weren't designed to handle is the huge amount of pornography and the incredibly easy access to it. And we have often situations, not just adults, but kids and teenagers that ingest tons and tons, you know, hours and hours, days and days worth. And it messes people up. Not everyone gets messed up by it, although I'm sure, you know, you watch enough of it at a young enough age, I'm sure it messes you up no matter what. But anyhow, this isn't a slant against pornography entirely, but more about the pornography for children and teenagers. And this is a terrible, sad story that came out of Kansas City, Missouri. I'm just going to play a bit of the clip. They sounded off quickly better, and you need to hear the experts say their biz.
Nurses at Children's Mercy Hospital noticing a disturbing trend as they see more children who are victims of sexual assault. 41 Next News reporter Sarah Plague shows us why nurses say porn is playing a factor.
So I think that was kind of shocking to all of us as we collected this data, is that almost half of our perpetrators are minors.
Children abusing children. Children's Mercy has been collecting data, and it shows that the perpetrator is likely to be between the ages of 11 and 15 years old.
The other thing that we're noticing is that a lot of those sexual assaults are violent sexual assaults, so they include physical violence in addition to sexual violence.
Recently, the International Association of Forensic Nurses said that the hospital is in the top 5% in the United States in the amount of sexual assault victims they see. Last year, Children's Mercy saw 444 kids who were sexually abused within the last 5 days. Victims are most likely girls, around 4 to 8 years old.
To sexually assault someone else, that's a learned behavior.
Wow, that just puts a terrible taste in my mouth and in my soul. That is just an awful, awful story. And that's what I mean with the degradation of our society, and particularly the degradation of families. The family unit is the most important institution that there is. It really is. I mean, that's where all the good stuff in life happens. That we have these families that are breaking up does have an impact, you know. The story probably means a bit more to me than maybe it should. Not that I have kids, but, you know, because of my close family bond I have, because my love of my family members, because I was a bit more involved maybe than normal for a person with helping my siblings to be raised. You know, I do have a good feel for this, and I understand the problem. You know, if you're a single parent family, you're at work, often, you know, the kids have to have a babysitter of some kind. Often it's the computer. or the internet. And think about all these kids are being left alone with the internet and they go to pornography. You see, they said that most of the victims were between the ages of 4 and 8, and the perpetrators were mostly male, 11 to 14. There's no word for that. That's abominable. That's messed up. That is fully on messed up. Now, they want to go later on to say that pornography is the main cause, and I think they're right, at least as that's the strong influence that's being added, the formula to the breakup of the family that wasn't necessarily there before. I mean, we've had problems with the breakup of the family all over the 20th century, particularly in the minority communities, and especially the black community. But, the rise of divorce has come up, and of course then that leads to more broken homes and more, I think it's half of kids now are born out of wedlock. These things have consequences, and this is sadly one of those consequences. Hopefully this is now, I hope this is just like the worst case scenario, because they said this is the top 5% of the country for this, but I don't know if they're noticing it in other places in the country or not. I don't know. Scary though. Scary stuff. This is why you guys need to so here's the happy warrior advice to raising kids safely with the internet. And we should write an article or do a little video for you guys. I would say number one, do not let kids have a computer of their own or a smartphone, and have a family computer, and have the family computer in a space where everyone can see it, an open ground. Get OpenDS and install that. It will help block some of the pornography. Porn blockers, they haven't really kept up with the technology, so they aren't. They're just very cumbersome. If a kid's smart, they'll be able to get around it. Raise your kids and specifically tell them not to do these things. I know you'll have to figure that out as a parent, because that's sticky. How do you push so now you don't put something in their head that wasn't there before? I get that, but train your kids to leave this stuff alone. If you can have if they're going to use a computer, make sure an adult or a responsible teenager is there to watch over them when they do it. I would say don't let kids have smartphones. Maybe teenagers, but, I would be completely fine if you didn't have a teen have it till they were in later years of high school. I know that sounds hard and it's inconvenient. Maybe you can get the flip phones if that makes it a little easier. But I mean, man, pornography can mess up the brain. Pornography is similar to the problems with addiction. Is that we are basically animals, and we didn't evolve to handle these kind of things, to have it there all the time, constantly, and it just can mess with your brain. It messes what you think the standards of sexuality. It messes up your head about romance is. It messes up with your head about how to treat the opposite sex. I mean, it's mind-numbing in a similar way to drugs that kind of numbs you from reality. Yeah, that's a poison you need to make sure that does not get in your home. I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so we're a little more stringent on this issue, but I think a lot of people in non-religious institutions are waking up to the fact that this stuff does have a price to be paid. And it's not a good one, okay? No one wants to have this happen to their family. No one. And that's why it's that important. This is a story you actually can have control over in your own life. And I wish you guys luck. I wish you luck. You can do it. It's hard. It'll be inconvenient. The kids will fuss and whine, but it's totally worth it. All right, so let's move on. Let's do one more serious story. Two. Let's do two. It's a serious one, half serious. So this next story is probably that's under everyone's radar. I don't blame you, but this is important to our friends in Europe and in some way to us too. Basically, the UN is about to say that migration, any human migration whatsoever in any circumstance, is a human right. Migration is a human right. And this legislation, they're meeting in Marrakesh on the 10th and 11th of December. And if they vote on this and agree to it, this will basically become the platform for binding law in the EU and member countries that want to enforce this or similar policy that agree to this idea that immigration, no matter what, is a human right. This will make it so in the EU, it will make it so that it is illegal to criticize immigration. And this is not a tinfoil hat thing either. That's what's so crazy about this. This would be the platform to make the argument and sign into law no criticism of immigration at all For proof, I point to Marcel de Graaf, who actually works. He is a representative for the Netherlands, a Dutch politician. I love what he says here because he directs it primarily at the media. And I'm glad that he's trying to reach out to them and hopefully wake some of them up. I don't know if it'll work or not, but I'm glad he tried. Just hear it from the horse's mouth. What is going to possibly happen if they agree to this? And it looks like they will. So if this does get agreed to, this very well could be the future of free speech in the EU member countries.
Say some words on the Global Compact on Migration. On the 10th and 11th of December, there will be an international congress in Marrakesh, Morocco, with regard to this Global Compact on Migration. And the participating countries are set to sign this agreement. And although this joint agreement isn't binding, it's still meant to be the legal framework on which the participating countries commit themselves to build new legislation. And one basic element of this new agreement is the extension of the definition of hate speech. The agreement wants to criminalize migration speech. Criticism of migration will become a criminal offense. And media outlets, and that also concerns you, that give room to criticism of migration can be shut down. The Compact for Migration is legalization of mass migration. It's declaring migration as a human right. So in fact, it will become impossible to criticize Ms. Merkel's welcome migrants politics without being at risk to be jailed for hate speech.
Oh, so there we go, Mr. de Graaf. Now, I hope you remember from the earlier segment about all the hate crime laws in the UK, and they have these incidents, and it's just very hard to enforce. But it does get enforced now and then, and often it gets enforced against the people on speech they just don't like. Remember Tommy Robinson, who just made the mistake of videotaping these disturbing rape gangs as they were going to court. He just, wanted to show people what they look like and who these perpetrators were. And the court said no one can see these people at all. And he just took video of them outside the court's building, and he was, arrested for it and put in danger, and it was just a mess. It was just a mess. This is the whole point. On the immigration issue in particular, this is what started the fervor of that is the strong populism we are seeing in Europe. Okay, it was the Arab Spring, which then the countries, in particular Germany, led by Merkel, pushed for unlimited immigration from Arab Spring nations. And, Syria being one of them. But, it was mostly these young men coming over. There were some families, huge crime rates came up. When people tried to say something, they got slapped down or punished or told to shut up. This is what caused the fervor in Europe. And this is why Merkel is on the way out. And she's been, the Chancellor of Germany forever now. I don't think Chancellor's the right word. Is it Chancellor? I want to say it's either President or Chancellor. No, it's Chancellor. Anyhow, this is why she's on the way out. Telling people that they can't talk about this is only going to make it worse. That's only, throwing gasoline on the fire. Bad idea. Bad idea. Just from a policy standpoint, this is a bad idea. But you know what? these politicians, these these elite politicians that run at the EU and the UN, they need to think on these things some more. I don't always know the reasons why they do it. Often they think this is the best way to go about things. Maybe they do have these countries in their best interest, at least in their hearts or minds they do. But let me tell you, this is not going to work out well. And, from a freedoms perspective, it's awful. It's horrible. It's a huge curtailing of speech. From a practical standpoint, it's just going to cause a bigger mess. You're just going to have a bigger fire. It's not going to put out the populism fervor. It's not going to cause the extreme right to stop rising. It's only going to make it worse. Okay? They're crazy over there. The Golden Dawn and whatnot. You don't want those people gaining power. You don't want it. This is just gonna make it worse, guys. Okay, now, what about the U.S.? Well, thankfully, we have the First Amendment, and, you know, thank you, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and the rest of the framers of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Thank you for making the First Amendment #1, and for protecting it and enshrining it and putting it off limits from politicians. Thank you so much, okay, because ideas like this can't come here, at least as long as we hold to those principles, because we have that protection. And look, there is no perfect policy on the planet, okay? Even the policies, you know, free enterprise, freedom of speech, rugged individualism, you know, rule of law, you know, just enough rule of law that everyone is safe and things, you know, are relatively fair, but not enough so, you know, that you're picking winners and losers. You know, it's just enough rule of law, and then let the people flower on their own, let them bloom. You know, and there are backdraws of that. To make that work, I talked about how you need to be a moral people. You need to be an upright people. You need to, you know, we need to have strong families that can raise kids so that they can handle being in a society like this, and that they can flourish and be at their best. So there are backlash on even the best of political ideas. So to ban speech on something like a policy like immigration is stupid. Even at its very best, every policy has some, you know, problem. There's some problem that comes along with it. You know, I'm very libertarian on the issue of drugs, but I recognize that there will be some people who get addicted to drugs that otherwise wouldn't. Okay, now I think we shouldn't put people in prison for the rest of their lives because, you know, they used coke or whatever. I know that's very libertarian to me. But, you know, I recognize that there's just going to be some backlash from that. There's going to be, you know, some side effects. You know, every drug has side effects. Even the best of medicine has side effects. And that's, you know, true of policy and life as well. Okay, so what do we have in the U.S., though? Well, we have a generation, and I just finished the book, Coddling the American Mind, and I talked about it with you guys last week about the 3 great untruths. And you have these kids that want to create safe spaces, and they buy into the hate speech idea. And they believe things are black and white. They believe things that, you know, if they're mean, that they will cause you actual physical damage. They'll give you PTSD. And they buy into, you know, the us versus them. They buy into all this garbage. And it's very unhealthy for them. And so we get situations where people like Bill Maher can't speak. You know, Bill Maher is probably the most friendly person, except for a few things, to be on college campuses. But if you're even one step out of line, it's too much for them to hear. It's too much. So they have to try to use the heckler's veto and push you out. So what am I talking about? I'm referring specifically this time to the Columbia Spectator, who had this story. Student organizers boot former SNL writer from stage during stand-up routine for jokes deemed offensive. The comedian, they were doing this thing, it was called Culture Shock Reclaim, and they were focusing, this was from the university's Asian American Alliance, so they're kind of focusing on the diversity of Asian American artistic expression. They want to break through stereotypes and challenges. So they asked this comedian to come. He is, in the world of comedy, he's kind of famous. He's a Saturday Night Live writer. I think he won several awards for his comedy. His name is Nimesh Patel. You know, he breaks through comedy because, you know, he's an Indian American. So that's kind of his how he fits into this role. He comes out and he does these jokes that in no way are conservative, in no way would be a joke that I'd normally tell or think was funny. So I'll just read from it. Members of the student group found Patel's skit offensive, specifically when the comedian joked that being gay cannot be a choice, adding that if a man is both black and gay, no one looks in the mirror and thinks, this black thing is too easy, just let me add another thing to it. When told to leave, the comedian protested, explaining that his performance was simply familiarizing students with the real world. The students' organizers, however, remained insistent that Patel end his skit. It's gotten even crazier. We deeply apologize for inviting Patel in the first place and bringing these comments into a space for inclusion and acceptance, the group posted to its Facebook page following the event. We apologize for the hurt his words caused members of the community. His comedy skit was cut short and interrupted, and they demand that he end his performance early. The students got on the stage, took his microphone, and denounced his jokes in front of the audience. he told this joke. They didn't like it. The students got up there. You know, I think there's someone on the back like, hey, you have to stop. He's like, I'm just going to finish my thing. And the students were like, no, we have to get up here. And we have to apologize to everyone for what this man did. And I'm not sure why they felt that they had to apologize. I don't understand. That doesn't even make much logical sense, let alone emotional sense. It got even crazier. A few students attend the event. I'm reading this article. It's hard not to laugh. The student group added on the Facebook post that members were still processing when it happened. PJ Media went there and asked some people about it, and the audience members, it said, a few students attending the event told them that the audience members did not boo or shout during the performance, and therefore they felt that ending the event early was unsolicited. I was very surprised. Either that means I'm not as sensitive as I should be, or the school thing was just dramatic. Or the whole thing was just dramatic, said one student. But that was the nice guy. That was the guy in the room that was like you and me. And I was like, I don't see the problem, guys. The audience wasn't that bad, but he wasn't bad. It was just not a good comedian. But I mean, it was nothing more than that. No, that was the real person in the room. This is amazing. This is amazing. This is the future America. This is your future. Congratulations. You raised these barbarians. Good job. Quote, I really dislike when people who are older say that our generation needs to be exposed to the real world, said another student, Sophia Zhao, to the Columbia Spectator. Obviously, the world is not a safe space, but just accepting that it's not and continue to perpetuate for its unsafeness of it is saying that it can't be changed. When older generations say you need to stop being so sensitive, it's like undermining what our generation is trying to do and accepting others and make it safer. There you go. There you go, guys. You're just perpetuating the unsafeness of it. I'm embarrassed. I am embarrassed. You know, if it was the WASP generation or the greatest generation, they were like, we're just trying to make the world, you know, we're just trying to make it safe. I know it's not safe, but we just want to make it safe. You know, it wasn't like concrete, like we want to stop Hitler. It's just, oh, we want people to be nice. It's painful. It's painful. And I don't want to totally use the snowflake terminology, but man, is it hard not to say snowflake. I mean, wow. Wow. This was top in the world of, left comedy, mainstream media comedy. This was a top guy. He's an Asian American. He's doing he has the jokes about being black and gay. I mean, he's playing all the right numbers that you're supposed to play. This is supposed to be a home run for this crowd. Home run for this crowd. But no, not even him. Not even him. And that's what's so crazy. And that's similar to the French protesters, is once you get these fires going, they're very hard to put out. And it's just a fervor and energy that's hard to put out. And it balks at reason. And this goes back to our tribal natures, okay? We're hypersocial animals. We're hypersocial animals. And we feed into social energy and social consciousness. And we get these things going, and it's hard to put out. You know, that's why my favorite quote from Jonah Goldberg is, groupthink is one hell of a drug. And it is. People can convince themselves to believe the dumbest things. These people are now joining our corporations. They're now joining our schools. They're now joining society. And these are the future leaders of our country. If you think the baby boomers screwed things up, okay, we're at 21 trillion officially in debt and much more unofficially. You just wait for these people. Just wait till they get a hold of the reins of power. And it used to be you could say that, well, everyone that leaves college is a lefty, but, once they see their first, once they have to pay federal taxes for the first time and they see how much is taken out of their paycheck, then they'll become on the right. That is no longer true. It just isn't. To be honest, I'm not sure if it was all that true in the first place. But that's what, wow. Wow. And that seems like a little innocuous story at first. And I don't blame you for just kind of brushing it off. But think about it. This guy is everything they could possibly want in comedy, and he's still not enough. Look, this goes back to everything. All our problems go back to the degradation of the family. They go back to us not overcoming our tribal natures. They go back to us not being civilized. You know, James Madison, I go back to James Madison, and here is the quote about freedom. Here's a quote. I like this one. "Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives." Here's two more James Madison quotes for you. "The advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty." Yeah, it's true. And he says, "In republics, the great danger is that the majority may not sufficiently respect the rights of the majority." And I'll follow this one more with John Quincy Adams' quote. This one you probably have all heard a million times, but here we go. Said John Adams, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And you know, here I'll do two more founding fathers. First here, Thomas Jefferson. People say the founding fathers did not see any of this coming. You are completely wrong. You are completely wrong. They saw a lot of it, a lot more than we give them credit for. Here's my proof. Thomas Jefferson saw the situation of our youth, and he warned us about it. This is a little bit longer quote, but I hope you can take the time to listen. Thank you. Quote, "To preserve the freedom of the human mind, then and freedom of the press, every spirit should be ready to devote itself to martyrdom. For as long as we may think as we will, and speak as we think, the condition of man will proceed in improvement. The generation which is going off the stage has deserved well of mankind for the struggles it has made, and for having arrested the course of despotism which had overwhelmed the world for thousands and thousands of years. If there seems to be a danger that the ground they have gained will be lost again, that danger comes from the generation your contemporary. But that the enthusiasm which characterizes youth should lift its parricide hands against freedom and science would be such a monstrous phenomenon as I cannot place among possible things in this age and country." You tell me that Thomas Jefferson did not see and foresee this exact situation. Now I will leave you here with two more great men, could be considered founding fathers, at least founding fathers of our day, and people have tried to knit back the fabric of America and that understood that freedom comes with a price and is not freely given, but is earned. And that it is so easy to lose freedom once it's gone, because the natural state of man is not freedom. The natural state of man is bullying and tribalism and arrogance and passion, and is freedom that makes our country as great and as wonderful and as good as it is today. Please, I hope you take the wisdom from these last two quotes. Thank you so much for listening to the Happy Warrior podcast. Please be sure to check me out on our social media or email, and be sure to leave a positive review on iTunes. All right, here we go. I give you Presidents Ronald Reagan and Presidents George H.W. Bush.
Our founding fathers here in this country brought about the only true revolution that has ever taken place in man's history. Every other revolution simply exchanged one set of rulers for another set of rulers. But only here did that little band of men, so advanced beyond their time that the world has never seen their like since, evolve the idea that you and I have within ourselves the God-given right and the ability to determine our own destiny. But freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
I come before you and assume the presidency at a moment rich with promise. We live in a peaceful, prosperous time, but we can make it better. For a new breeze is blowing, and a world refreshed by freedom seems reborn. For in man's heart, if not in fact, the day of the dictator is over. The totalitarian era is passing. Its old ideas blown away like leaves from an ancient lifeless tree. A new breeze is blowing, and a nation, refreshed by freedom, stands ready to push on. There's new ground to be broken and new action to be taken. There are times when the future seems thick as a fog. You sit and wait, hoping the mist will lift and reveal the right path. But this is a time when the future seems a door you can walk right through into a room called tomorrow. Great nations of the world are moving toward democracy through the door to freedom. Men and women of the world move toward free markets through the door to prosperity. The people of the world agitate for free expression and free thought through the door to the moral and intellectual satisfactions that only liberty allows. We know what works. Freedom works. We know what's right. Freedom is right. We know how to secure a more just and prosperous life for man on earth through free markets, free speech, free elections, and the exercise of free will unhampered by the state. For the first time in this century, for the first time in perhaps all history, man does not have to invent a system by which to live. We don't have to talk late into the night about which form of government is better. We don't have to wrest justice from the kings. We only have to summon it from within ourselves. We must act on what we know. I take as my guide the hope of a saint. In crucial things, unity. In important things, diversity. In all things, generosity. America today is a proud, free nation, decent and civil, a place we cannot help but love. We know in our hearts, not loudly and proudly, but as a simple fact, that this country has meaning beyond what we see and that our strength is a force for good. But have we changed as a nation, even in our time? Are we enthralled with material things, less appreciative of the nobility of work and sacrifice? My friends, we are not the sum of our possessions. They are not the measure of our lives. In our hearts, we know what matters. We cannot hope only to leave our children a bigger car, a bigger bank account. We must hope to give them a sense of what it means to be a loyal friend, a loving parent, a citizen who leaves his home, his neighborhood, and town better than he found it. And what do we want the men and women who work with us to say when we're no longer there? That we were more driven to succeed than anyone around us? Or that we stopped to ask if a sick child had gotten better and stayed a moment there to trade a word of friendship? No president, no government can teach us to remember what is best in what we are. But if the man you have chosen to lead this government can help make a difference, if he can celebrate the quieter, deeper successes that are made not of gold and silk, but of better hearts and finer souls, if he can do these things, then he must. America is never wholly herself unless she is engaged in high moral principle. We as a people have such a purpose today. It is to make kinder the face of the nation and gentler the face of the world. And my first act as president is a prayer. And I ask you to bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we bow our heads and thank you for your love. Accept our thanks for the peace that yields this day and the shared faith that makes its continuance likely. Make us strong to do your work, willing to heed and hear your will, and write on our hearts these words. Use power to help people. For we are given power not to advance our own purposes, nor to make a great show in the world, nor a name. There is but one just use of power, and it is to serve people. Help us remember, Lord. Amen.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast, the Happy Warrior Podcast. I really appreciate the support and time and energies you put into this. They're greatly, greatly appreciated. God bless this country. God bless America. God bless its citizens. Especially bless those that sacrifice sweat, blood, and tears for our sacred liberties and freedoms. Especially the troops and law enforcement. Thank you. I wish you all a happy week. Until next time, this is the Happy Warrior Podcast. Good night.
Thank you for listening. The Happy Warrior Podcast, hosted by Peter Vaughn Pischke, produced by Robert Mehling, a production of the Sioux Empire Podcast Network. Learn more at happy-warrior.net.
A production of the SiouxEmpire.com.